All right. Do you think an individual can affect the trend of this mimetic thing?
Sure.
How do they do that?
Let me try a different question to you, Jonathan. Why do people
Okay.
say, I want to be a great writer, but nobody says I want to be a great reader?
Because people
Is it
think that
just the
they have their
cliche?
own. Well,
Why do
I
they say that?
I think they have their own ideas. I think they put their ideas before another person's ideas. I find that all the time. I mean, the whole idea of persuasion
Really?
is to what? Of course. Of course. I mean, your beliefs are so important to you because it is you that put them there. Ultimately, it was you that read the book that then said this might be right. But for say me or anyone else to come up to you and say, Professor, this is the way it is, it would be very difficult to swallow unless you took it and you buried it in your own sort of subliminal rhetoric, as I've heard it be called. So I think to comment on what you're asking about the greatest writer instead of the greatest reader is just to comment on the idea that people have a preference toward their own ideas, their own adopted system, subset
Why?
system of the language. Why?
Why?
Because they're an individual. Because they experience this idea and the realm of ideas. They experience it through language. And just because of the confusion of language, it creates problems that they have to rectify. And that if they can, then they feel more self-empowered.
Do you know that before literacy, there was no notion of private property, intellectual private property, that the notion of individual thought and individual
Mm-hmm.
genius is literally either unheard of or it's punishable by death in oral ancient societies. Thinking for
Well,
oneself was
okay.
so deviant and so violent of an act that it's only in modern contemporary functional anonymity, and it's literacy and money that made possible functional anonymity. This sort of
Mm-hmm.
individualist anonymity. It's capitalism. I think it has a lot more to do with capitalism and the idea that someone's going to sell their ideas, that this is what's really going on. I don't think you seem not to be really reckoning
Really?
with the way marketing, the way market forces are playing upon, and capitalist forces are playing upon a romantic ideal of producing ideas that somehow will be sold, sellable, and make one famous. It's not any more difficult to be a great author than a great reader. It's just less romantic to be a great reader.
Well, that might be, but I would say that say Aristotle, for example, he didn't write for the sake of capitalism, certainly.
There's no existing writings of Aristotle. All the work we have of Aristotle was compiled over 100 years after him by a guy named Andronicus. We have none of
Was
Aristotle's
was
extant
that for
writing.
capitalism?
Of course not.
Well,
So you
okay.
don't
Well
see, I
then,
don't think you're tracking how this really happened. Do you think that there were
maybe I
ancient
don't.
authors? I don't think there were. See, what a lot of those are, seriously, Jonathan, those were lecture notes that were compiled. He spoke, people wrote down. See, modern libraries are very different than scriptoriums. Scriptoriums,
Mm-hmm.
back before the printing press, were basically in-house lecture places where the master would speak, and then as the
Mm.
master spoke, other people would take notes. Those notes would get compiled, and then we call them books. But like codexes,
I see.
scriptoria, I mean, there's all kinds of things. The notion of a book, and I think all this is interesting. When you go back, the ancient logic was that the mature, the elder, the wise imparted knowledge. What I see is a lot of cocky young people who don't want to admit they're young know-nothings, and so they overcompensate with a big dramatic, I want to think my own thoughts dance to prove that they're actually an elder who deserves to be heard rather than to shut up and listen for a second. They have no idea how many the number of people who have never read Epictetus to me is unbelievable. There's tons of people who think they're so smart, and I want to go, have you ever read Epictetus? And they go, no, he's obviously irrelevant, he's a dead man. I go, why don't you go read him for a second and then see if you really want to have that cocky of an attitude about it. I think most people when they read it, they go, holy shit, I want to learn more about this kind of stuff. How can I learn to read this stuff? Because I think if I learn to read this, I'm going to grow a self-worth wanting.
Well, I will grant you that if you keep yourself in a fishbowl, you can master your environment very quickly and feel very self-important because of it. And I do think I will grant you that. I will absolutely grant you that. But I really I must identify myself as exactly the kind of person you're talking about, as the cocky, arrogant guy that wants to think for himself.
I think you're a symptom of a certain parenting model that came out around the 19...
I'll leave my mom and dad out of it, but
no, seriously. I'm going to tell you that there was a notion of the precious child that came around after the Depression years. I mean, see, there's so much loss of historical context that some of this stuff gets very hard to talk about. There's just a radical, and this is partly promoted by it's capitalism and futurism and a sort of dismissal of the past as part of the capitalist agenda. Young people don't realize how they're being appropriated by it. They don't even know that Rupert Murdoch owns MySpace or Facebook. You tell them that they do, and you know what they say? They'll say to you, good, I don't want to get advertisements for stuff I don't buy. They've just relegated themselves to being consumers. They accept that as the frame, and it's partly due to a loss of historical context. I think the loss of family relations, the loss of family depth, the rise of the geographical dispersion as people careerism, the more attention toward the child who is the little princess and little special, the way that they didn't have that in the sort of early Depression years, and it was a compensation for a lost sense of childhood, but it's promoted a lot of young prima donnas who think they're also special and precious, and a lot of them are grossly misinformed. They're utterly ill-informed, and they're arrogant about their right to be a doofus.
All right. Well, such fervent opinion, probably.
Well, you said you wanted controversy. I'm trying to help you here.
No. What I'm saying is that, such fervent opinion probably is an identification of an opinion of what you think it ought to be, of where we ought to go, or what direction we ought to take. So give me your lowdown of that.
That we should celebrate other people. We should celebrate our openness to history. We should say, wow, what it means to be a person is to be able to recover the past and actually learn an idea. I can take a book from Spinoza and I can struggle and recover an idea that was hundreds of years old, and it's not that it's irrelevant. It becomes relevant as I learn to do it. It's this kind of stuff right here. It's opening to radical others in dialogue. I mean, the fact that you have a dialogue channel rather than you just shooting your own whatever you want to say, to me at least seems you're kind of open to what I'm suggesting, that it's not just about having our own thoughts, it's that our own thoughts are actually something that occur in dialogue, and it's about creating meaningful dialogue, not about getting one's ideas out there. Getting one's ideas out there makes it sound like it's a brand or you're marketing a product. Jumping into an ongoing dialogue that has already been going on and realize that the dialogue was going on before you started. And Bakhtin, right, the father of dialogism, has a great line where he says, in order for the dialogue to begin, the first voice must be heard. I think people think, well, they need to speak first. His point was to realize that Western history, Western thought, has been ongoing in a dialogue about what it means to be human, what it means to love, what it means to care about others, what are responsibilities, what are self-other relations. This dialogue has been going on for thousands of years, and lots of people are scared of that fact, and they'd rather just go, well, let's just pretend it begins with me, and I'm going to start the dialogue, instead of jumping into the dialogue, listening for a while, and then trying to meaningfully participate. So my vision would be people who more willingly celebrate sociality, celebrate their capacity to learn, and are willing to jump into a dialogue rather than monologically force everyone to begin with what they've started with.
I wonder if it's just a condition of young adulthood more than anything else. And I wonder, and I'm sure, you being a professor see these guys be carted through the 4-year, 5-year, 6-year program, whatever they happen to fall into all the time.
Yeah. Well, you're sort of hearing some of my pitch, to them. And a lot of them, they get it. I mean, some of them come in with this kind of cocky, I want to think for myself, and some of them start to go, wow, I think I was just deluding myself. And the more I get up to the library and the more I read, the more individual of a mind I feel. I feel like I'm not a life off the rack. I don't feel like I'm just getting my ideas from the television and from popular thought and from what's in the air. Like when I go to the library and I find something from the 1600s, there you're establishing a particular relationship that is making a unique you. You want to be unique? Create that uniqueness. Earn it. Carefully select who you read, what you listen to, how you open to others.
Well, what's the source of the genuine ideas out there that are worth reading about?
I think, to me, the big ideas are, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be self-aware? Are we on the planet or of the planet? Am I of the world? Am I a thing? Am I not a thing? Am I a machine that's a biological machine? Am I a spirit? What is spirit? I think there's tons and tons of wonderful things that have been talked about for millennia.